The piece was not on the program. It was a secret, buried in the middle of a Chopin nocturne, a single, unfamiliar melody that made the Shipping King's entire world stop. In a room of 500 people, he was the only one who knew it. A song his dead wife wrote for him, a song that had never been written down and had died with her, until tonight played by a stranger. Lee Jae-hoon was a titan of industry, a man who commanded a global shipping empire from Seoul. The pianist, Elara Vance, was a rising star from New York, hired for a single night's performance. They should have had nothing in common. But in that moment, as the last note hung in the air, a single question became unavoidable. How did a stranger from another continent learn a song that was never meant to leave this man's heart? To understand the shock in that ballroom, you have to understand the wall Lee Jae-hoon had built around his grief. After his wife Mina's death 3 years prior, he became a ghost in his own empire. He moved through boardrooms and docks in Busan with a silent, terrifying efficiency. The annual charity gala for the Mina Park Foundation was his one public concession to her memory, a sleek, black-tie event where he would give a 2-minute speech about maritime scholarships, then retreat to a private booth, observing the room like a sentinel. He was 46, a billionaire who had inherited a shipping line and turned it into a global logistics beast, but in the quiet of his penthouse overlooking the Han River, he was a man preserving a museum. Mina's piano sat untouched, covered in a sheet. Her sheet music, filled with her handwritten notations, was locked in a climate-controlled archive. The melody she composed for him, a simple lullaby based on an old Jeju Island folk tune, existed only in 2 places, his memory, and on a single encrypted digital file she made as a birthday gift. He had not played it since the day she died. It was a secular prayer, and he was its only worshiper. Meanwhile, 7,000 miles away in Manhattan, Elara Vance was practicing. At 32, she was what the classical world calls a rising star, which often means critically acclaimed but financially precarious. She had the technical prowess for Carnegie Hall, but her agent was pushing her toward more commercial, high-profile gigs. The offer from Seoul came through a prestigious European talent agency. The fee was exceptional, $50,000 for one night, plus first-class everything. The client was anonymous, listed only as the foundation. The repertoire was standard gala fare, Chopin, Debussy, a showpiece by Capistan. The only oddity was a request in the contract's appendix. It stated, "The artist will be provided with a private digital file 1 week prior to the event. This file is for personal listening only. The artist must not speak of its contents, replicate it, or derive any musical material from it. Its purpose is for tonal and emotional reference only." Elara signed. She needed the money. She boarded the flight to Incheon, the mystery file sitting unopened in her phone, a sealed envelope in a digital world. Their worlds were parallel lines, engineered never to meet. Lee Jae-hoon's assistant had chosen Elara from a shortlist precisely because she had no connection to Korea, no prior work in Asia. She was a clean, professional slate. For Elara, this was just another stage, another grand piano under bright lights. But that private file, she opened it on her 3rd night in the hotel, curious. It was a voice memo, slightly dusty with age. A woman's voice, warm and soft, humming a melody. Then she began to sing, not with a trained singer's precision, but with intimate, off-key affection. The lyrics were in Korean, a language Elara didn't understand. It was just a fragment, maybe 45 seconds long. The emotional quality was startlingly raw, a love song, a lullaby, a private joke. The instructions said to use it for tonal reference. Elara listened once, felt a strange pang of trespassing, and closed the app. She did not listen again. But the melody, simple and haunting, had already woven itself into her subconscious. The gala was at the Shilla Hotel. 1,000 white orchids lined the hall. The who's who of Korean industry and diplomacy were there. Elara performed her first set, Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor. She played beautifully, technically flawless. Lee Jae-hoon watched from his booth, his face impassive. A part of him always braced for these events, for the well-meaning condolences that still came 3 years later. The music was just ambient noise, a soundtrack to his solitude. Then, as Alara transitioned into her second piece, something shifted. It started as an improvisatory bridge, a moment of artistic freedom she often took. Her fingers, seemingly of their own volition, strayed into a sequence of intervals that felt familiar. The melody from the voice memo, the one she'd heard only once, emerged from her hands as naturally as breath. In his booth, Lee Jae-hoon froze. His champagne glass halfway to his lips stopped. The ambient noise of the ballroom, the clink of crystal, the murmur of conversation faded into a silent roar. Every note was a scalpel. That was Mina's melody, not similar, exact. The specific, slightly unconventional turn in the second phrase that she always laughed about. The way the resolution lingered, just as she used to hum it to him when he was stressed. His eyes locked onto the pianist. This black woman, a stranger, was dissecting his most sacred memory in front of 500 people. His mind, trained for crisis, raced through impossible explanations. Corporate espionage, a cruel hack, some bizarre targeted psychological attack. His chief of security, seated beside him, sensed the change in his posture and leaned in. "Sir," Jae-hoon did not answer. He was watching Alara's face, and he saw it wasn't the face of someone performing a stolen piece. Her eyes were closed. Her expression was one of deep personal channeling. She wasn't playing the song, she was remembering it. The song ended, woven back into the fabric of the chopin. The ballroom erupted in polite applause. Alara opened her eyes, gave a slight bow. Her gaze swept the room and for a fraction of a second connected with the man in the private booth. She saw a face not of applause but of utter devastating shock. A man turned to stone. The air left her lungs. In that instant she knew. The anonymous client, the mysterious file, the strange feeling of trespassing, it had all converged here. She had just played his asterisk song, and from the devastation on his face, it was a song that belonged to a grave. Performance ended. Alara was ushered back to a green room. Before she could process, the door opened. Not a handler, but Lee Jae-hoon himself. He had dismissed his security. He stood in the doorway, the power of his presence filling the small room, but his voice when he spoke was barely a whisper. "Where did you hear that?" Alara, her heart pounding, told the truth. "It was in a file, a voice memo. I was told to use it for reference." "Who gave it to you?" "My agent. It came from the client." He stepped inside, closing the door. "The client is me. I did not send you a file." The silence between them was absolute. Then Alara, reaching for her phone, said, "The woman singing, who is she?" Lee Jae-hoon looked at her, and for the first time the wall cracked. "She was my wife." He paused. "She died 3 years ago, and that song, no one else in the world knew it." But that was wrong. Someone else did know it. The woman on the recording knew it. And now Alara Vance knew it. The connection was there, a thread stretching across an ocean, hidden in a digital file. Lee Jae-hoon had spent 3 years building a fortress of silence around his past. And in one night, a pianist from New York had found the secret door. The question was no longer just how she knew the song. It was who, from beyond the grave, had given it to her. And why. The digital trail was a ghost. Jae-hoon's security team, the same unit that monitored maritime piracy threats, tore apart the file's metadata. It had been uploaded to a dummy server in Zurich, routed through a VPN in Singapore, and sent from a generic email account created the day Alara's agency was first contacted. The payment, however, was real. It had been wired from a private trust fund in Luxembourg, one with a board member who was a close friend of Mina's family. A dead end, professionally constructed. This wasn't a hack, it was a delivery. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths and expense not to steal the song, but to send it across the world to a specific pianist. The question shifted from how to who would do this, and more terrifyingly, why. Jae-hoon ordered every piece of Mina's digital estate re-examined. Her old laptops, her cloud backups, even the smart home logs from their former house. He was looking for a breach, a sign of theft. Instead, in a buried folder labeled lesson plans, they found a series of video calls. Mina had been a patron of the arts, funding scholarships at the Seoul Institute of the Arts. But these recordings were different. They were one-on-one virtual piano tutorials. The student's video feed was always off. Only a username appeared, Evance22 *. Alara, sitting in a secure conference room in the Lee Maritime headquarters, watched the first playback. She went pale. It was from 7 years ago. She remembered this. In her final year at Juilliard, she'd been struggling to afford a specific tonal analysis seminar. An anonymous fellowship had covered it, with the condition she participate in monthly cross-cultural music mentorship sessions. Her mentor was a soft-spoken Korean woman named Mina, a composer who wanted to practice her English and discuss the emotional architecture of folk music. They never used video, only audio and screen sharing for scores. To Alara, it was a bizarre but generous gig. They talked about Schumann, about Korean Pansari asterisk, about the spaces between notes where feeling resides. The sessions lasted a year, until Alara graduated. She'd never known Mina's full name. She'd never known she was the wife of a shipping magnate. She'd never known she was dying. "She talked about you," Alara said, her voice hollow. "Not by name, she called you my North Star. She said your world was all container ships and balance sheets, but that you had the soul of a poet. She said you hated the piano piece she wrote for you because it made you cry." Jae-hoon stared at the frozen video frame on the monitor, Mina's smiling face, caught in a moment of teaching a stranger. The betrayal he'd felt began to curdle into a more complex, profound ache. His wife had a secret life, a friendship she'd kept from him, and she had shared their asterisk song with this young woman. But the mystery deepened. The file Alara received wasn't from those old lesson recordings. The voice memo was new, or at least newer. The timestamp metadata had been scrubbed, but the audio quality was clearer. Mina's voice in the lessons was strong. In the memo, it was thinner, layered with a faint, rhythmic beep in the background. A hospital beep. Jae-hoon's head of security, a former intelligence officer named Park, pointed it out. This was recorded in a medical facility. The acoustic profile matches the private wing of Severance Hospital where Mrs. Lee was treated. The realization was a physical blow. Mina had recorded this in her final months. She had created a new copy of their song and had arranged for it to be sent, years after her death, to Alara Vance. Why? The answer seemed to lie in what else was in the secret folder. Among the tutorial files was a final video message, dated 2 weeks before Mina died. The file name was simply, "For E, when the time is right asterisk." Alara, with Jae-hoon standing rigidly behind her, played it. Mina appeared on screen. She was in bed, pale but radiant. The camera was close. "Alara," she began, her English fluent, gentle. "If you are seeing this, then someone has followed my instructions and you have played the song for him, which means you are probably very confused and he is probably very shocked. I am sorry for the drama, but you were always the only one who understood it." She smiled. "You asked me once during our third session why the melody in that little folk song I played for you felt so alive even though it was so sad. You said, 'It sounds like someone remembering joy, not feeling it.' You were right. That song is my heart. It is the sound of my love for my husband, and I need you to be its keeper." Took a breath, the effort visible. "My husband, Jae-hoon, is a fortress. He believes strength is silence. He will grieve for me by building walls. This song, it is the key to a door he will lock. I cannot leave it with him. He will bury it. I must leave it with you. You who understood its meaning without knowing its words. My instructions are sealed with my lawyers. On the 5th anniversary of my death, or if he ever relaunches the charity gala in my name, whichever comes first, you are to be hired to play. And you are to be given this file. Not to copy, just to listen. I knew if you heard it just once, your fingers would find it when the moment was right. You are the only person in the world besides me and him who will ever hear it. When you play it for him, you will break his heart open, and he will need that." Mina looked directly into the camera, her eyes fierce with love. "Jae-hoon, my love, if you are watching this with her, you must be furious with me, and so sad, please. Listen to her. She is not a stranger. She is my friend. I chose her for you, because a fortress needs a window or everyone inside suffocates." The video ended. The room was silent. The corporate world outside the glass walls continued, unaware of the earthquake within. Alara was crying quietly. Jae-hoon was not. He was dismantling. Every assumption, every memory of his marriage was being reassembled before his eyes. His wife, in her final days, had orchestrated an elaborate, posthumous intervention. She had seen the lonely future he was crafting and had sent a cure across the world in the form of a melody and a messenger. The scale of it was overwhelming. The trust she placed in a woman he'd never met was absolute. The love was terrifying. But a practical, chilling thought emerged. Mina said her instructions were with her lawyers. Jae-hoon summoned the lead partner of her estate firm. The man was confused. He knew of no such instructions. The trust in Luxembourg had made the payment, but its director stated he was acting on sealed orders from Mrs. Lee to be opened only on a specific date. The orders had been delivered to the trust by a private courier from Mina's personal assistant, Kim Soo-jin. Soo-jin had been with Mina for 15 years. She had been devastated by her death and had left Jae-hoon's employment 6 months after, citing grief. Jae-hoon had given her a generous severance. She had vanished from Seoul's professional circles. The security team tracked her to a small coastal town in Jeju Island. When Jae-hoon and Alara arrived at her modest home overlooking the sea, she was waiting for them with tea, as if she'd known they would come. "She made me promise," Soo-jin said, her hand steady around her cup. "She knew you would isolate yourself, Chairman Lee. She knew the foundation would become a cold thing, a monument. The gala was her test. If you ever allowed it to become a real event again, not just a duty, it meant you might be ready to remember her with joy, not just pain. My job was to watch. When you approved the full budget for this year's gala with the live music, I triggered the protocol. I contacted the trust. I hired the agency. I sent the file." Jae-hoon asked, his voice raw, "Why the secrecy? Why this performance?" Soo-jin looked at Alara. "Because she had to come to you through the music. Not through a letter, not through a video. It had to be asterisk, a live asterisk. In that moment in front of everyone, so you couldn't rationalize it away, so you would have to feel it." She turned back to Jae-hoon. "Your wife spent her last months not just saying goodbye, but building a bridge for you. She said you two lived in a world of steel and deep water, but that your love was a folk song, simple, fragile, and meant to be passed on. Alara was the one she chose to pass it to. The pieces fit. The mystery was solved. It was a breathtaking act of love from beyond the grave. Jae-hoon should have felt relief, closure. Instead, as they flew back to Seoul, a new tension settled. The emotional shockwave was now receding, and in its wake stood two people bound by a secret they hadn't chosen. Alara had completed her task. She was a vessel for a message that had now been delivered. Her professional obligation was over, but the world had seen that moment in the ballroom. The viral machinery was already starting to grind. A blurry video from a guest's phone had leaked. It showed the exact moment Jae-hoon froze during Alara's performance. The caption read, "Billionaire Lee Jae-hoon hears something shocking in Pianist solo. What did she play?" The Korean media, which had always respected the Lee family's privacy, now scented a story. Who was this American pianist? Why did the chairman personally visit her green room? Gossip blogs began digging into Alara's past, connecting dots to her anonymous fellowship. The narrative was spiraling out of the sanctuary of their private investigation. Jae-hoon's board was getting nervous. The company's stock was stable, but the chairman's uncharacteristic behavior was a topic in the halls. He had canceled meetings. He was preoccupied. In the eyes of his old guard directors, he was being emotionally compromised by a foreign artist and a ghost. The stability of the empire, built on his impenetrable focus, now seemed to have a crack, and through that crack poured not just grief but scrutiny. Alara, sitting in her hotel room, watched the online speculation grow. She saw comments twisting the beautiful, painful truth into sordid tabloid fodder. Mistress, blackmail, a scandal from the grave. Her professional reputation, her art, was being reduced to a soap opera side plot. She had done what her friend Mina asked, and now she was caught in the aftermath of a billionaire's private life. She wanted to leave, to go back to New York and let these people sort out their own drama. But she couldn't, not just because of the contract, but because of the look on Mina's face in that final video. "She is my friend. I chose her for you." The pressure found its first fracture point in a scheduled press briefing for the foundation. A reporter from a major newspaper, instead of asking about scholarship funds, asked Jae-hoon, "Chairman Lee, can you clarify the nature of your relationship with pianist Alara Vance, and if it's connected to your late wife?" Jae-hoon, trained for corporate warfare, not personal ambush, defaulted to cold deflection. "My private life is not relevant to the foundation's work. Miss Vance was a hired performer." That is all. The answer was technically true. It was also a betrayal of everything Mina had orchestrated, and a public dismissal of Alara's profound, sacrificial role. Alara saw the clip. The message was clear. To protect his corporate facade, he was willing to reduce her to hired help. The unique sacred thread connecting them through Mina was being severed by the very walls Mina had tried to dismantle. Furious and heartbroken, Alara booked a flight out of Incheon for the next morning. She sent one text to Jae-hoon's private number. "The fortress wins. I'm leaving. Tell Mina I'm sorry." But as her car pulled up to the international departures terminal, it was intercepted, not by security but by Kim Soo-jin. The former assistant stood in front of the vehicle, forcing it to stop. She approached Alara's window, her face grim. "You cannot leave," she said. "It is not over." Alara shook her head. "It is for me, he made that clear." Soo-jin leaned closer, her voice low. "You misunderstand. The song was the key, but it was only the first part. Mina did not send you just to break his heart. She sent you because she knew what was coming. She left something for you, something she said you would need to protect him." Soo-jin handed Alara a small, sealed flash drive, its casing engraved with a single musical note. She called this her final composition. "It's not a song, it's a proof." Back at her hotel with the flight canceled, Alara plugged it in. The drive contained one file, a video diary. Mina, looking even more frail, spoke directly to the camera in a mix of Korean and English. "Alara, if you are watching this, the song has done its work, but now you must understand why. My husband's world is not just steel and water. It is also knives in the dark." The video cut to shaky, clandestine footage taken from Mina's phone years earlier. It showed a heated argument between Jae-hoon's uncle, Kwon Tae-seok, the company's chief operating officer, and a man Mina identified as a regional port authority official. The audio was crystal clear. The official was demanding revised fees for overlooking customs irregularities on certain shipments. The uncle Kwon was not refusing, he was negotiating. "The old man is gone," Kwon said, referring to Jae-hoon's late father. "My nephew runs the company, but I run the sea. We can arrange a new current." It was a brazen admission of systemic bribery. Mina's voiceover returned. "I discovered this by accident. I told Jae-hoon. He confronted his uncle. Kwon denied it, said the video was edited, said I was a meddling wife sick with grief. The board believed him. Jae-hoon, to keep peace in the family, let it go. But I didn't stop looking." The next clips were financial records, smuggled from the COO's own computer. They showed a complex web of shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Vanuatu, all siphoning millions from Lee Maritime through inflated contracts and phantom port charges. The scale was staggering. Over $80 million diverted over 7 years. "He is not just stealing," Mina said. "He is building a parallel empire, and he is not alone." The final piece of footage was the most dangerous. It showed Kwon Tae-seok meeting with the vice chairman of Daehan Shipbuilding, Lee Maritime's biggest rival, in a private tea house. They were discussing a hostile merger. Once Jae-hoon is destabilized by scandal, by grief, by perceived incompetence, the board will lose confidence. Kwon and Daehan will swoop in, break the company, and take the profitable routes for themselves. My husband's life's work will be cannibalized, and he will be left with nothing. Kwon thinks the grief has made Jae-hoon weak. He is waiting for him to break. I cannot let that happen." Alara sat back, her mind reeling. The beautiful love story was also a corporate thriller. Mina hadn't just been fighting Jae-hoon's grief, she'd been trying to arm him against a coup. And she'd chosen Alara, an outsider with no stake in the family or the company, to be the courier of this toxic truth. Because anyone inside Korea, anyone connected to the corporate world, could be bought or intimidated. A pianist from New York was the perfect, improbable carrier. Alara knew she had to get this to Jae-hoon immediately, but the public dismissal at the press conference stung. She forwarded the video file to his most private, secure email with a one-line note, "Your wife's last gift. Watch it alone." Then she waited. Jae-hoon was in a board strategy meeting when the notification pinged on his encrypted device. He excused himself. In his private office, he watched the entire diary. The shock was different this time, colder, sharper. The betrayal by his uncle, his father's own brother, was a blade to the gut, but the awe at his wife's courage was overwhelming. While he was building walls, she had been waging a secret war to protect his kingdom, and she had done it while dying. The guilt was annihilating. He had dismissed her concerns. He had chosen family harmony over truth. And now the viper was still in the nest, waiting. He acted with brutal efficiency. He called his head of security, Park, and his most trusted internal auditor. He gave them the files. "Verify everything. Do not alert a soul. I want a forensic chain on every dollar, every meeting." The investigation, armed with Mina's evidence, was a guided missile. It took 72 hours. The proof was irrefutable. Kwon Tae-seok had not only embezzled, but he had also compromised ship safety reports, bribed safety inspectors to overlook violations on older vessels to save money, violations that could have led to environmental disasters or loss of life. The depth of the treachery was bottomless. Jae-hoon planned his move. He would present the evidence to the full board and have his uncle arrested. But Kwon had spies everywhere. A loyalist in the audit department sent a panic text. Kwon knew the walls were closing in, and he responded not with retreat but with a preemptive nuclear strike. The next morning, the Korean financial news outlet Money Today dropped the story. The headline, "Lee Maritime Heir in Romantic Entanglement with American Musician Amidst Financial Turmoil." The article was a masterclass in poison. It mentioned the strange performance at the gala, the chairman's distracted behavior, and the mysterious extended stay of Alara Vance. Then it pivoted to unnamed board sources expressing deep concern over financial irregularities and governance lapses under Chairman Lee's increasingly erratic leadership. It didn't name Kwon. It didn't have to. The narrative was clear. Jae-hoon was a lovesick fool, neglecting his company for a foreign woman while the business crumbled. The stock price began to tumble the moment the markets opened. Kwon had played the perfect card. He used Jae-hoon's one moment of public emotion, his one vulnerability, as proof of his unfitness to lead. He weaponized Mina's final gift against her husband. Alara, watching the news cycle explode, felt the trap snap shut. She was no longer a messenger or a friend. She was the scandal, the destabilizing event Mina had feared. Kwon was using her to trigger the very coup Mina had tried to prevent. Jae-hoon's board demanded an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was glacial. Kwon sat at the table, the picture of concerned loyalty. He spoke of family, of legacy, of the need for steady hands. He proposed a temporary leave of absence for Jae-hoon until personal matters are resolved. It was a soft coup. Jae-hoon looked around the table. He saw fear in the eyes of his allies and greed in the eyes of his uncle's faction. He knew if he walked out that door, he would never walk back in. His company, his father's legacy, Mina's sacrifice, all would be erased. He stood up. He did not present Mina's evidence. Not yet. Instead, he said, "You speak of steady hands. My hands are steady. They are holding the truth, and the truth is not about my personal life. The truth is about theft, fraud, and treason against this company. I call for a vote of no confidence in Chief Operating Officer Kwon Tae-seok." The room gasped. Kwon laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "The grief has twisted your mind, nephew. You have no proof." "I have a witness," Jae-hoon said. All eyes turned to him. "A witness who is not afraid of you." He did not name her, but in that moment he knew he had to bring Alara to the heart of the beast. He had to ask her to stand in a room of hostile, powerful men and tell them a dead woman's story, to expose herself completely. It was an impossible ask. He had publicly diminished her. He had failed to protect her from the media storm, and now he needed her to save everything. He found her at the hotel, packing again. "I need your help," he said, the words foreign in his mouth. Alara shook her head. You have an entire corporation. You have security, lawyers, billions of dollars. I'm a pianist with a visa. I've done what Mina asked. I'm done. Jae-hoon didn't argue. He played the one card he had left. He opened his tablet and showed her a live feed from the trading floor. Lee Maritime's stock was in free fall. If Kwon wins, he will dismantle the company. The Mina Park Foundation will be the first thing he sells off. Every scholarship, every music program, every piece of her legacy will be liquidated. He will erase her from the world, not just from my heart, from history. He paused, the weight of it crushing his voice. She sent you to protect me, but I think she sent you to protect this asterisk. The good she tried to do in the world. I cannot protect it alone. The fortress, it needs a defender from the outside. Alara looked at the falling numbers, then at the pain on Jae-hoon's face. She thought of Mina's fierce eyes in the video diary. I cannot let that happen. The woman had been a warrior. She had entrusted Alara with her final mission. Walking away now would be a betrayal of that trust, of the friendship that had once been a lifeline in a practice room in New York. What do you need me to do? Alara asked, her voice quiet with resignation. Come to the board meeting tomorrow, Jae-hoon said. Tell them about Mina. Tell them about the lessons. Tell them why she sent you the song. Make them understand that what they see as a scandal is a message. Then show them the proof she left for you. Be the witness she chose. It was a terrifying proposition. She would be walking into a den of wolves with no status, no protection beyond Jae-hoon's word. Her career, her privacy, her safety in a foreign country, all would be on the line. But she remembered the last words of Mina's diary. Some truths can only be sung, and some songs are battles. The next day, Alara Vance walked into the boardroom of Lee Maritime. 40 floors above Seoul, surrounded by glass and steel, she faced a table of 20 stern-faced men. Kwon Tae-seok stared at her with open contempt. Jae-hoon gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Alara took a breath, her pianist's hands steady at her sides. She was not here to perform. She was here to testify. And she began with the only thing that made sense. 3 years ago, a dying woman taught me about the space between notes where feeling resides. She was preparing me for this moment. Alara Vance, standing before the assembled power of Lee Maritime, did not talk about spreadsheets or shell companies. She talked about the space between notes. She described Mina's voice on those late-night calls, how she dissected a Korean folk melody with the precision of a surgeon and the heart of a poet. She told them about the anonymous fellowship that felt like a miracle, and the woman who became a mentor. She wasn't preparing me for a concert, Alara said, her voice gaining strength. She was preparing me to hear a cry for help. The song she sent me wasn't a love letter, it was a key. And this, she said, holding up the flash drive, is the lock it opens. At Jae-hoon's nod, the evidence was displayed on the main screen. The clandestine video of Kwon Tae-seok negotiating bribes played in stark silence. The complex web of offshore accounts unfurled. The meeting with the rival shipbuilding executive played out. The room, already tense, turned arctic. Kwon's face drained of color, then flushed with fury. He stood, pounding the table. This is a fabrication, a dead woman's fantasy, and this entertainer's fiction. She is his lover, bought and paid for to discredit me. Alara didn't flinch. She looked at the uncle, then at the board. You know what's fascinating about a musical phrase? It either rings true or it doesn't. Your COO's story doesn't ring true. Mina Lee's does. She was dying. She used her last strength not to rest, but to record the truth. She chose me because I was the one person in the world she gestured to Jae-hoon, could not control, could not silence, and would never think to look for. She sacrificed her final privacy, so her husband wouldn't be blindsided by the betrayal sitting at this table. The chairman of the audit committee, an elderly man who had served with Jae-hoon's father, spoke. Miss Vance, you have no stake in this company. Why involve yourself in this family matter? Alara met his gaze. Because Mina Lee was my friend, and she asked me to. In my world, when a composer leaves a final instruction in their score, you honor it. She left a score for her husband's future. I'm just playing the notes she wrote. It was the perfect analogy for the room. These were men who understood legacy, instructions, and honor. The emotional calculus shifted. This wasn't a tawdry scandal. It was a testament of loyalty from beyond the grave, executed by a stranger with nothing to gain. Jae-hoon finally spoke, his voice low and final. The evidence has been verified by independent forensic auditors. The Financial Crimes Unit has been notified. Kwon Tae-seok, you are removed from the board and from all company positions, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You will be available to answer the prosecutor's questions. Kwon was let out, sputtering threats that faded down the hallway. The remaining board, shaken, voted unanimously to reaffirm Jae-hoon's leadership and to launch a full internal reform guided by the evidence Mina had gathered. The coup was over, dismantled by a dead woman's foresight and a pianist's courage. In the days that followed, the public story went through a seismic shift. Jae-hoon held a press conference, not in the corporate boardroom but at the Seoul Institute of the Arts. He stood beside Alara. He did not mention embezzlement or corporate warfare. He spoke of his wife. He revealed, for the first time publicly, her passion for music, her work as a quiet mentor, and her final, beautiful project, a cross-cultural bridge built through melody. He acknowledged the leaked video from the gala. What you saw, he said, was not a scandal. It was a message from my wife, delivered by the friend she chose. I was not shocked by a secret. I was awakened by a love that outsmarted even death. He announced the expansion of the Mina Park Foundation into a global music mentorship initiative, its first director to be Alara Vance. The narrative flipped overnight. The story of the billionaire's shock became a viral legend of timeless love and extraordinary friendship. Alara was not a homewrecker. She was a guardian. The stock price not only recovered but climbed, as investors backed a company with a soul and a story that captured the world's imagination. For Jae-hoon and Alara, the aftermath was a quieter, more complex composition. The grand conspiracy was solved, the company saved, Mina's legacy secured. But they were now left in the quiet after the storm, two people bound by a ghost. Alara moved into a guest apartment in Jae-hoon's building, not as an employee but as the foundation's director and awkwardly as his friend. They shared meals. They talked about Mina. He asked questions about the lessons, hungry for details of his wife he never knew. Alara answered, sharing stories of Mina's wit, her fierce opinions on Brahms, her incredible loneliness. One evening in the living room where Mina's piano still sat covered, Jae-hoon asked Alara to play something. Not their song, anything else. She played a simple, melancholic piece by Schumann. When she finished, he said, "She was teaching you how to grieve, so you could teach me." Alara nodded. "I think she was teaching both of us how to listen." Weeks passed. The foundation work began. They were a team, but a team orbiting a shared absence. The public saw a fairy tale. The reality was a delicate, silent negotiation of grief and gratitude, until the day Alara found a letter. It was in a box of Mina's personal effects, delivered to Alara by Soo-jin. The box contained sheet music Mina had composed, including the full, fleshed-out arrangement of the folk melody, now titled For Jae-hoon and the Friend Who Remembers. Tucked inside was an envelope labeled For Alara, to be read when the work is done. Alara opened it with trembling hands. Mina's handwriting, elegant and sloping, filled the page. "My dear Alara asterisk, while reading this you have done the impossible. You have broken his heart open and you have stood in the breach. You have my eternal gratitude and my deepest apology for the burden. I have one final, selfish request. Do not let him live in the museum of me. The song was a key, not a cage. He must not spend his life as a curator of my memory. Help him write a new song, and perhaps, if you can, find a verse in it for yourself. You are the strongest, truest person I have ever known. He needs that, the world needs that. Be brave again. With all my love asterisk. Mina asterisk." Alara sat with the letter for a long time. She realized then that Mina's plan had always had a third act. The first was to shock Jae-hoon out of his isolation. The second was to save his company. The third was to give him permission to live again, and to give Alara a home she'd never expected. That night she gave the letter to Jai-hoon. He read it in silence, then read it again. He walked to the covered piano and for the first time in 3 years removed the sheet. He sat at the bench, placed his hands on the keys and did not play. He simply sat there in the presence of the instrument, not as a shrine, but as a thing that could make sound again. The final surprise came from the foundation's first major donor. A charitable trust, wishing to remain anonymous, donated $20 million. The paperwork was handled by Soo-jin. Only later, during a routine audit, did they discover the trust was registered in the Cayman Islands. It was funded by the repatriated assets recovered from Kwon Tae-seok's embezzlement. The prosecutor's office, in a unique plea agreement, had allowed a portion of the seized funds to be directed to the victim's designated charity. Jai-hoon had designated the Mina Park Foundation. In a poetic twist, the money stolen from Lee Maritime by greed was now fueling Mina's legacy of generosity. The corruption had literally been transformed into art. A year after the gala, the foundation's inaugural concert was held. Alara performed, this time with a full chamber orchestra. The program ended with the world premiere of Mina's completed composition, For Jai-hoon and the Friend Who Remembers. Jai-hoon sat in the front row. He did not freeze. He listened and he smiled. After the performance at the reception, he did not retreat to a private booth. He stood with Alara greeting guests, a team. Later, on the terrace overlooking the city lights, he said to her, "She planned all of this, every step." Alara nodded, looking at the stars. "She composed a life for you after hers ended." Jai-hoon was quiet for a moment. "She composed one for you too." He turned to her. "The foundation needs a permanent artistic director in Seoul. The work is here." He wasn't asking her to stay. He was stating a fact that contained a question. Alara thought of her tiny apartment in New York, the grind of auditions, the loneliness of the road. She thought of the work here, the purpose, the ghost of a friend who had become family. She thought of the man beside her, no longer a fortress but a work in progress like herself. "The work is here," she agreed. He didn't reach for her hand. They weren't there yet. Maybe they would never be. Theirs was a different kind of love story, forged in loss and loyalty, scored by a woman who believed in bridges. But as they stood side by side, the music from the ballroom drifting out to the terrace, the distance between them felt like the space between notes, not empty, but full of potential, resonating with everything that had been and everything that could be. The melody was over. The duet was just beginning. We tell stories about love after death as if they are endings. A final kiss, a last whisper, a closed chapter. But the story of Mina, Jai-hoon, and Alara is about love that refused to end. It was a love that became a strategy, a composition, a bridge built from a dying woman's courage to a stranger's trust to a grieving man's salvation. It reminds us that the most powerful legacy isn't what we leave behind in a will, but what we instigate in the hearts of the living. Mina Lee looked at the two most isolated people she knew, her husband, entombed in his empire, and her friend, fighting for a breakthrough in a competitive world, and she composed a duet for them. She used the only language that could cross every border, music. And in doing so, she didn't just preserve a memory, she created a new future. The Lee Maritime Empire is now guided by a clarity forged in fire. The foundation is a thriving force, and in a penthouse overlooking Seoul, a piano is played again. But the lingering question isn't about them, it's about us. What silent melody is guiding your life? What unseen connection, what forgotten friendship might be the key to a door you've locked? We are all, in some way, living in forts of our own making, waiting for a signal to come back to life. Sometimes that signal is a song. Sometimes it's a letter. Sometimes it's a person we never expected. The miracle is in the listening. So the next time you hear a piece of music that stops you in your tracks, or feel an inexplicable pull toward a stranger, or find yourself remembering someone gone with a sharp, sweet pain, consider this. You might not just be reminiscing. You might be receiving an instruction, an invitation to be part of a story bigger than your own grief, your own fear, your own walls. The most profound narratives are not about power or wealth, but about the fragile, devastating, and beautiful ways we find each other in the dark. Mina's song was a secret, then a shock, then a salvation. It proves that love in its truest form is not a feeling you have. It's a thing you do. It's a plan you make. It's a bridge you build even when you know you'll never cross it. Her final composition was a masterpiece of human connection, and its final note hasn't been played yet. Because the best stories, like the best music, don't really end. They just change key and play on. If you found a bridge in your own life today, or if you're still waiting for your signal, remember this story. And remember to subscribe. We're here to bring you more tales of the unexpected connections that change everything.